the police told us to go inside. They told us to lock our doors, put up more lights, don't talk to strangers, don't go out at night, and whatever we do, don't go in the park. Because Mount Moechella Meridian Hill Park was seen as the center of violence in the neighborhood. It actually was not. The surrounding streets were far more dangerous than any part of the park, but that was the perception. And so I was the head of our neighborhood association at the time, and we called a meeting in my home the following night where you had to break the police request to stay inside just to stand up for the idea of trying to make some peace in the neighborhood. And over 50 people packed into my house wanting to do something. And somebody suggested that we have a crime patrol, like they had in far southeast. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. I lived in New York. I don't want to be a vigilante. And he said, no, this isn't like that. These are grandparents. And these African American grandparents are lifting up the idea, the most powerful force on earth being community, which they were able to advance by saying hello. That was their role. They had to say hello to everybody they met, and they couldn't carry anything that looked remotely like a weapon. Not a large dog or small dog or large flashlight, because they knew the community was more powerful than anything. And so, over the objections of the police, those grandparents trained us to start our little crime patrol here. And 9 days after Ricky died, we started going inside this park at night, which we'd never been in at night. And people said we were crazy to go in there. But we went in and we found it was so dangerous that it was safe. There was no one there at night to mug, so there were no muggers, there was no one there to buy drugs, so there were no drug dealers at night. And then just when we thought it was completely empty, we saw two shadowy figures at the head. We remember we were supposed to say hello. And so we could still ourselves up, walked up to the first shadowy figure, said, hey, we're here with the neighborhood patrol, we're trying to make the neighborhood a little safer. And there was a pause, and the hand extended and said, I'm Reverend Morris Samuel, welcome to Meridian Hill. Morris had been coming to the park for 36 years, nearly every day the weather was fair. He was in the park the night of Dr. King's assassination. Even in that horrific moment, he found peace in the park. He knew when the ducks had come and tried to nest in the park. He knew when people dying of AIDS had come to the park for solace in their final days. He was the mayor of the park. I told him it was kind of his parish. The second person, but in my last name, had little in common with my life. He'd been an addict, he'd been a dealer, couldn't read or write. But when Howard Coleman talked to him at the park, he had passion, he had fire, he had tears in his eyes. He said this was the most beautiful place in the world, and I looked at it. And those two introduced us to a deeper sense of the neighborhood in the park than I ever had known before. For me, it was the beginning of Neighborhood 101, which was still a journey I'm on 31 years later. This park is actually an ancient sacred ground of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway nations. Over 1,000 generations of people gathered here on this hilltop before Europeans ever discovered the land and shoved people out, ripped them out of their homes, and actually eradicated, as far as we know, the Nacotchtank tribe from the whole region. And it's a sacred ground. It's a place that's on the axis of the southward flow of the Potomac River. It's a place with deep memories. The music that we hear today is, in a way, just an echo of what's been coming through the air here on the hilltop for 20,000 years. And so this is National Public Lands Day. And this is a day to kind of celebrate what public lands can mean for people, but also to ask the question, are public lands really public? Are they accessible and accountable to the public? Does the public feel ownership and responsibility and opportunity to make those places of healing and equity and justice for all? And I would say that largely that's not the case. And so Parks and People is the organization that we formed out of this work in the park. Our little patrol, by listening to those voices, started taking their memories as dreams of what could happen. When these old timers in the park would tell us about the music in the park, we were like, well, we can help bring music back. And we started bringing the kids back into the park and asking the kids, well, what do you dream of? And it has been an amazing, amazing journey. And the person who really inspired me most in all of this was a woman named Josephine Butler. Josephine was my friend and my boss. She was the chair of our board and a mentor, and a hero really to people all across DC. She grew up on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, next to where Harriet Tubman grew up. She moved here at the age of 13 when she had tuberculosis to try to cure herself, which she did. And then she got a job while still a teenager as a laundress, and formed America's first ever union of Black women laundry workers. I laugh because everything she did, she was always looking at how could she do more. And from organizing those laundry workers, she was inspired, and she learned about the union movement, and she met Paul Robeson. And Josephine was so deeply inspired by Paul Robeson's fire and passion about making the world a fairer place for all. She decided that's what she wanted to do, and that's what she did. So she was a labor organizer. She was doing clean air education for the Lung Association 20 years before the environmental movement. When Brown versus Board of Ed was decided and the rest of the South was dragging its heels on desegregation, she took it into her own hands as the head of the Morgan School Board here on 18th Street, where Marie Reed is. And she walked up the hill to the all-white school at Adams and said, we got to show the South how we integrate. And that's what they did, and that's how Adams Morgan got its name. But she's perhaps best known for what she did in the early 1960s when she came together with Julius Hobson and Hilda Mason to co-found a modern movement for the District of Columbia to at last become the 51st state of the United States. And the flag, I want to point out that the flag above is not the current flag of the US, it's the aspirational flag. It's the 51 star flag. And if Puerto Rico decides they really want to be a state, then we'll fly the 52 star flag. Josephine had big dreams of what the world could be. She would talk about these things that need to happen. People would say, well, that's going to take a long time. And she would say, well, yeah, exactly. That's why we have to get started right now. And so that's the spirit. In fact, right outside of the store, there's a photo I want you to look at of Joe, taken by the Washington Post, right after the United States Senate soundingly defeated voting rights for the people of DC. And the Post want to get a picture of Josephine giving up. Take a look at the photo and tell me if that isn't the most stubbornly joyful photo you've ever seen. And that's because she knew that even though we lost that round, that they finally voted on it. And so eventually we would win, it just wouldn't be in her lifetime. And she would try to teach me about revolutionary patience, and in my impatience I couldn't really hear that. I'm still trying to learn it to this day. But that's what she really meant. That if we really are serious about change, we have to be committed beyond our own individual lifetimes to making these changes. And so, I was actually with Jo the night that she passed, and I've never seen a more determined face in my life. Her work was not done. In this building, when she died, I was the last one to speak at her memorial at the bottom of the hill in St. Justin. And I held up her hat. I don't know if you guys know about her. She had a hat that had her causes on it. I just held up her hat and invoked her name, and the whole congregation rose like her spirit was rising. And I said, we don't need a memorial to Jo. We are her living memorial. We were carrying the work. They just dedicated a mural in honor of her and George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement and Shaw. And people were at the dedication were saying, it's too bad Jo isn't here anymore. And I said, oh no. She's here. She's here, and you, she's here, and everybody's carrying that torch. So that's the spirit of what this building is about, and that's the spirit of what Parks and People is trying to do, and trying to actually use the land as an instrument of equity and justice. And so we started with that park. We ultimately, by bringing the kids back, bringing the music back, creating an advocacy force in the community, we were able to reduce crime in that park over 99%. Not with tons of police, but with tons of community. Because it turns out that it wasn't about incarcerating people only exacerbates injustice, right? It wasn't about policing, it was about people. It was about programming. It was about parks being places for real community to happen. Zones of peace, to use the term that Gandhi used. And so that's what this is all about. This hilltop is known as Meridian Hill to Native people because they see it as a sacred, ancient alignment of the southward flow of the Potomac River. But it's also known as Malcolm X Park. And it's fitting in thinking of Malcolm X Park, which we believe Angela Davis is the one who first gave it that name, to remember that Malcolm X said that all revolution is rooted in the land. And if you think about it, you think about all the struggles, all the oppression that happens in the world. So much of it is about control of the land, of real estate. Look at all the displacement that's happened in this era of gentrification. And so if we're really going to talk about public land, we have to address that. How can the land actually be an instrument of these things? And so in our work in Parks and People, we use the land for food security. So we actually run 2 farms, and we support a number of other ones where we're growing food year-round. It's a tiny amount, folks, but we're trying to use that to show that the understanding of the land that was a big part of what drove the enslavement of so many people. These plantation owners knew that there were people in Africa who were amazing farmers. And that deep understanding of the land is something that we must not lose, that we need to learn from. Black agriculture has fallen massively in the past 50 years because it's been displaced by agribusiness. But you see agriculture surging in the inner city, and there's a real chance for that to be an instrument of actual food security and food equity. You had a question?
You talked a little bit about the history of the park for the Civil War.
This park before the Civil War?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. 100 million years ago, this was the edge of the Potomac River. In Pangea, the Potomac was a vast inland sea. Potomac means place where worlds come together, trading place. It's an ancient native term. If you go to the Museum of the American Indian, the main atrium is called the Potomac for that reason. It's a great place. If you were back then, before there was smog, a native person could stand on the hill and they could see the differences in the currents of the Potomac River where the sturgeon were migrating up that river, the 11-foot sturgeon that were in that river. So this is an ancient geological formation. If you go to the new dinosaur exhibit at the Museum of Natural History, which by the way, some really exciting things happening there to revolutionize how they tell the story of man and people, with their new head of visitor services, who's incredible, Carla Easter. You can see that. You can actually see there's a smart board that shows you how DC was part of Africa in Pangea. Just follow, you can see where DC was at any given moment in Pangea. But so, yeah, this was the edge of the Potomac River, and it's kind of cool that eventually they brought up Potomac River pebbles to make the walls of the park. But it has so many pieces of history. We don't know most of its history. We didn't have the climate or the rock like Egypt had to have tangible symbols of all that culture that was here that somehow is trying to speak to us, that we have to try to learn from. But that's deep. The Nacotchtank tribe was forced out of here. They were forced down to Annalastan Island, which is now called Roosevelt Island, and they were completely pushed out of there. The Piscataway Nation was forced down the river, and Chief Billy Redwing Tyak of the Piscataway Nation will not even come into DC because it's too painful. But the hill has been a place where, still you can feel the Native people tell us that the land has the past, present, and future embedded in it. It's true biologically, but they're trying to tell us that there's a more intangible way that the land embodies all of that. And you can feel that. You can feel how many of the things that we know are happening in Native First Nations communities are still trying to happen now. The drumming that's happening right now, the gathering. It was a natural place to gather because you had the soft breezes coming up off the coastal plain below. You could see down the river. It's right on an ancient native trail that goes all the way across the city, which we walk a couple times a year. And so it is a really special spot. And when native tribes walked across the entire North American continent to mourn what had happened to the continent since Columbus and the 500th anniversary of Columbus's discovery, they chose to end their walks, not at the White House, but in this sacred ground on top of the hill. And the person who was there to meet them was Josephine Butler, and they presented her. needed blessings.
Is it Benjamin Banneker surveyed some of the park of this area?
Benjamin Banneker absolutely did. Not the park, because the park way post-dates him, but yes, in terms of the hill, this was a vital part of the original L'Enfant plan that Benjamin Banneker surveyed. And so it's fitting that Banneker High School was right on the ridge, because he surveyed that. And so L'Enfant set the city within the encircling hills, and Boundary Street, which is now called Florida Avenue, at the bottom of the park, was the edge of that old federal city. So when you saw the address Washington, DC, that meant the city of Washington, which ended right there within the wider District of Columbia. There were 5 cities within the District of Columbia. There was Alexandria, there was Georgetown, there was Uniontown, there was Washington. There's a 5th one I'm forgetting, but that was how Boundary Street worked. And so this was wildland up here. When you think about Goya Enzaldua's wonderful book, Borderlands, there's a thing about wild places. Those are places where we can kind of cross boundaries, we can test out possibilities. And so naturally, people who didn't feel included, people didn't feel included, just gave me the 10 minutes time, you know how the flow is. Migrated to those wild lands. If you were African American after the Civil War and you were free, where did you go? What did you do? You didn't have training or connections or experience or money. They came into the cities and they often lived in squalor in the alleys. There's a whole wonderful book called Alley Life in Washington, DC. But they couldn't even find a burial place when they died. And there were some Quakers who, after the Civil War, decided to partner with the African American community to have an African American cemetery up here on the hill. Which
is it still here?
It is. It was the largest uncharted African American cemetery in the whole city.
It's
right over here at Walter Pierce Park. There's 8,428 men, women, and children buried in that park, all from the Reconstruction era, from that 13-year period. We now know all of their names. We know where they lived. We know how old they were when they died, and we know how their death was reported.
Okay, but what I read is that the Union troops, we call it troops for the Civil War, were based here, and this was a black community.
So a couple things on that. Yes, there were black communities here. It wasn't segregated. Segregation happened later, so it was interwoven. But there were black houses, people living right there where the park is, who were evicted when they created the park.
Yeah,
that's true. I'm jumping around in history to answer.
No, that's the sad part, that the black community was destroyed.
The guy who commanded the regiment, who the Shaw neighborhood is named after, Colonel Robert Shaw, actually bivouacked here before he went to his death commanding the regiment. There was a Union Army hospital here. There was an African American theological seminary before the Civil War, the Wayland Seminary. This is also where George Washington University began, right behind this building, where you see University Place. We actually found some of the original carved bluestone boundary wall of what was called Colombian College. So this was a cradle of higher education. Black people helped to build the park. Black people put up with a lot of the worst when the park was abandoned in the 60s and 70s and 80s, when the crack war and everything was decimating things, and the war on drugs was imprisoning people. The park became the single most crime-ridden national park. And the thought was, well, we just have to crack down, but that didn't work. It doesn't work because it's not a solution, it only makes things worse.
Do you think that Angela Davis' statement calling it Malcolm X Park was an opportunity to reclaim it?
Yes.
For the black community?
Absolutely. So
there's always been a problem with Meridian and Malcolm X Park. As a matter of fact, probably 6 months ago, the Parks Department had put up a sign that said Meridian Hill, Malcolm X Park. The next day it was checking out. It was right on 15th Street coming up the hill.
It's very confusing. The park has 2 names. Okay, thank you. The park has two names, actually has other names. A lot of the Latinx community just calls it Euclid Park, because they come to it on Euclid. It didn't have any name posted for the longest time. The Park Service actually used to list it in the official federal phone book as Mountain Mex Park. And so I use both names because I think that the Meridian name is actually about the hill. That's a geological formation that goes back to 100 million years. But it's important to recognize why Angela Davis and others felt the need to change the name, because there was so much racism, there still is so much racism in how public land is thought of. Things like when they wanted to, the park was never finished. Not just because of World War II, but because people said, oh, putting lights in the fountains, which was always part of the plan, will attract too much of the, quote, colored element to the park. This is in federal records of the U.S. Fine Arts Commission. There was a specific structured racism about how even just basic design choices are made in the park. And yet the park actually draws its inspiration from the ancient gardens of Africa.
Beautiful park, yeah. I'm going to show my age, because I was here in the 70s.
Yes.
And we used to have African Liberation Day, every May 25th. And the vendors from all over the country would be lined up and down this park. So there's a lot of history with connection with the Black community, the African community. There's a lot of connection here, and I'm just glad that you have kept it and trying to bring it back.
We're trying, and you're bringing up something we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, people have been bringing the vending back into the park because commerce is part of community. And artists and vendors want to share their wares. And that's what you do on a village green. That's what the village green used to be all about. Where you graze your cattle there and bring your products. That's what people want to do. This is federal land, and so it goes through a lot of rigid requirements as a federal park. But it's also a community place that has deep heritage long before it ever was a federal site. And so that's kind of that's the sort of murky area that we have to navigate. And that's why we all have to assert that the park belongs to everybody. It is a park for all people. So I'm going to close by saying that we have maps outside on this store and the one across the way that are on that theme of a park for all people, specifically challenging the idea that the environment is a white thing. This is something we find a lot. People think, oh, that's a white thing. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But there's really a rainbow story, and those two maps try to show some of the non-white heritage, just as touchstones for people to ask these deeper questions like what you're asking.
Yeah, during
there
was a Vietnam War, there was demonstrations here.
Yep. And after, and before. It's been a place for all kinds of protests. Obviously, in Black Lives Matter, the park has been a major anchor for everything going down toward the White House. It's been wonderful. You have to go, but did you have something you want to ask?
No, except to say thank you. This was really, really informative. I learned a lot. I knew some of the history of Mountain Mex Park because I always knew it was I'm not from here originally. But so it's really great to hear a little bit more of the history behind it. So thank you.
If you guys want to find out any more, we have a website at WashingtonParks.net, and you can write to us at info@WashingtonParks.net.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video from NEXTfest Culture and Conversations series, presented by CapitalBop. There is no way to fully replicate the spirit of those days at NEXTfest, but we are so glad to have this curated archive to share with you. At CapitalBop, our mission is to promote, present, and preserve the sound and soul of DC. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, or find us at CapitalBop.com. Be sure to subscribe to CapitalBop's YouTube channel for more content like this. And again, that's CapitalBop with an A, CapitalBop.com. Maybe I'll catch you at the next show.